Hi friends, it's been 5 years now since my mom passed from dementia, and looking back, she had plenty of subtle signs that my brothers and I overlooked for decades. Early intervention, it could have slowed down her memory loss. So in this video, we're going to talk about 10 early signs to look for in your loved ones. And we'll also talk about effective actions that you can take today that have been shown across the globe to improve brain health. Now, front-loading effort in life is always going to be better, especially when it comes to dementia. Now, I know this to be true as a medical doctor and a daughter caring for my mom. Now, we know we can slow down cognitive decline in many types of dementia through lifestyle, especially since there are no effective medications. On the other hand, lifestyle can also speed up dementia. So if I go back in time, everything would have been so much better for our family and my mom if we had all recognized and addressed those subtle signs to work together to support my mom at the last leg of her journey. And watching this video, I hope will help you not make the same mistakes and ignore the 10 early signs of dementia, because having the right infrastructure, the right intervention and interaction in the beginning of the journey will be the most effective time to change the rate at which a person declines in their memory. Dementia happens 20 to 30 years before someone is officially diagnosed. So keep in mind that even though these signs and symptoms are going to be common, it doesn't mean that someone has dementia for sure. It's simply because these symptoms, they represent the brain's default mode, and they are in all of us. We have all these signs and symptoms. This is the brain's basic physiology to protect us from danger and to save energy. But in a healthy brain, we have the ability to course correct, to change ourselves, to train ourselves, to overcome difficult thoughts and not let default thoughts dominate our thoughts and personalities. And that's why if you recognize these signs in you or your loved ones and you don't like it, you can choose to train your brain and his or her brain to do something else. Professional help often can speed up the training and give you ideas of what else you can do. The good news is, if you recognize and want to change, these are both great signs that you have a healthy brain. And the key is to preserve that brain and to improve your brain health. So number one is losing things, getting lost, or getting disoriented. Have you ever misplaced your keys or wallet? Frustrating, isn't it? Or maybe you've parked your car in the parking lot and then struggled to find it, spending hours looking for it. Yes, I know this is very common. And these are some of the things that my mom did way before she was diagnosed with dementia, misplacing things. However, this is also a very common early sign of dementia. And for someone with a healthy brain, they will be able to make a course correct just about immediately. Now, I once misplaced my key and I found it right next to me on the seat. I didn't put it in the same spot. From then on, I designated one spot for my keys, so I haven't misplaced it since. But that's because I realized that I just needed routine. So I started a routine for myself. A healthy brain is able to do that, make that leap of logic and recognize their mistake and correct it. But a person who has dementia don't recognize it, don't know how to course correct, and will struggle and continue to misplace the same items or get lost in real time, even while they're driving. And this can happen on routes that they've driven for years. Disorientation with location is a telltale sign of early dementia. Now, it's important to recognize this early sign and then intervene. Help can come in different supportive ways. Number one is to develop a routine. Number two, driving at that point really shouldn't be part of that routine. Help them, though, store their house keys or other keys in specific places. And simply, you may just have to follow them along and pay attention to where they put things. Every caregiver should really help them with finding their items because it can cause them a lot of frustration. And if they pay attention to where they place things, just like following a toddler, then you will be able to avoid other problems. Play memory games to train their brain. Memorize random facts. Practice helps the brain. It's the brain's way to exercise, and have fun doing it. Now, the parts of the brain that remembers location and supports navigation are really centered on the side of your temples and in your medial temporal lobe, especially the hippocampus inside. Now, the hippocampus, it's a brain structure that actually can increase in size even as an adult. It's what builds a cognitive map and allows you to remember where you are, how places are related to each other, and how to get from point A to point B. It works together with other structures like the entorhinal cortex, which acts as a gateway between hippocampus and the rest of the cortex. Now, when we talk about the hippocampus, and I mentioned it can increase in size, it's one of those things that are very sensitive to your lifestyle. It is the most plastic region in the adult brain. And like I said, can literally change its size as well as its function in response to your lifestyle and your metabolic signals. So several foods and behaviors are consistently associated with larger hippocampal volume and better memory. And this is across human and animal studies. Number one is regular aerobic exercise. That's the strongest lifestyle factor known to increase hippocampal size. So activities like brisk walking, jogging, cycling, and swimming, they all increase the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which improves cerebral blood flow. And it also stimulates neurogenesis in the hippocampus. So even moderate exercise done consistently has been shown to slow hippocampal shrinkage. And this can just happen with aging. But really, it's aging from a lack of movement. And in some cases, it can give it back to the normal optimal size. So my brother made it a point to walk with my mother every day. And sometimes she wouldn't want to do it. And sometimes she'd complain it was too cold or raining outside. That's okay. He would just walk her in circles around the living room. And he believed exercise decreased brain shrinkage and increased people's memory. It doesn't just do that for demented people. It also does that for young, healthy people. Exercise has been shown to improve test scores. I think we underestimated power of our muscles to make hormones and signaling molecules to then support the rest of our body, especially our brain. So if you're not in the habit of moving, just walking. It doesn't need to be like running a marathon. You just need to get out and walk, a brisk walk, a stroll up and down a hill. It's beautiful for not just your muscles to increase your core strength, but also to increase your agility and to move your motor cortex and your sensory cortex in your brain. Our brain is made out of different regions, and it's super important to use all of the brain and not just focus on one thing. Because when you do that, the rest of the brain parts that move your arms and legs, they're not as robust. So this is why it's important for all of us to move every day. Moving every day not only protects our metabolism, but protects our brain health. Sleep is also essential. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. But when you sleep, deep consolidated sleep supports your hippocampus, memory consolidation, and clearance of metabolic waste. So if you have chronic sleep deprivation, that raises hormones like cortisol, which selectively damages hippocampal neurons. So protecting sleep duration and circadian rhythm is a direct investment in your hippocampal health. Stress reduction is another important factor. It matters because the hippocampus is highly sensitive to cortisol. That's the stress hormone. So chronic physiological stress and anxiety, that's associated with hippocampal atrophy. So it's important not to stress people out or not to stress yourself out. Practices that lower stress hormones, such as mindfulness, meditation, time with nature, a walk, social connection, breathing practices, they'll help preserve your hippocampal volume. And you can do this yourself, but it's even better if you do it with your loved ones. Now, from a nutrition standpoint, polyphenol-rich plants, foods that are colorful, they strongly support the hippocampus. So we're talking about blueberries, strawberries, grapes, pomegranates, cherries, cocoa powder, green tea, and colorful vegetables. They all reduce neural inflammation and oxidative stress, which happens tremendously at an astronomical rate in the brain. But these foods also increase increase BDNF signaling. So they directly influence your hippocampal plasticity. Now, on the nutrition note, don't forget omega-3 fatty acids, especially DHA from whole food sources like small fatty fish or algae. They're all structural components of your entire brain, your membranes, and they support synaptic growth in the hippocampus. So adequate omega-3 intakes is essential to have every day. And it's definitely associated with better memory performance and slower hippocampal shrinkage compared to not getting your omega-3s. So your overall dietary pattern, that also stabilizes your metabolism, and a stable blood sugar is critical. Ironically, elevated glucose levels from prediabetes to diabetes increases insulin resistance, and that impairs hippocampal function. But if you eat a diet centered on whole plants, legumes, intact grains, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, and fruits, a diversity of them, rather than ultra-processed refined carbohydrates, those are associated with larger hippocampal volume and better cognition. Time-restricted eating can also help because it activates pathways like BDNF, AMPK, and autophagy, which supports your hippocampal resilience and neurogenesis, and especially when you safely do it appropriately. Novel items, learning new skills, reading, language learning, and spatial navigation, they all stimulate the hippocampal circuits. So offering them a leader to help them learn is important. The hippocampus responds to being used, and learning and memory formation uses the hippocampus. The number 2 issue is choosing social isolation. People who have dementia often choose to be alone, and it is extremely hard to get them to engage with people with advanced dementia. And yes, I understand it's common for many people to choose to be isolated. Remember how I said that symptoms of dementia can start 3 decades before they get an official diagnosis? Well, 3 decades before, I bet they were pretty isolated too. So choosing to spend all your time by yourself, locked up with AI, isolated in your room is not healthy, no matter who you are, and it increases your risk of dementia. But there is something you can do about that right now. Plan events with friends. Attend family events, attend group activities, go to your local church, go join a club. Social isolation is not a way for brain health, and connection is a way to reserve and conserve your brain. Your brain really just wants to conserve energy and protect itself. And it takes a lot of energy to engage with people. This is because the brain has several interconnected parts to work together for socialization. The key regions are the frontal, temporal, limbic systems. And by working together, they coordinate perception, emotion, decision-making, and reward to then socialize again. And the only way to exercise these regions of the brain like this is through social interactions. And that means you have to meet and talk to people face to face. Now, there are some brain regions that get activated when you're talking, when you're looking, when you're listening, right? Connecting with people. And yes, it is very normal to feel a little stressful, maybe a little anxiety and fear when it comes to meeting new people. This is the brain's default mode. Remember, to protect yourself and conserve energy. It doesn't want you to do these things. But being isolated isn't a healthy way to interact with the world. We should be interacting, connecting with people who aren't threatening or dangerous. So a healthy brain recognizes this and is able to overcome those negative emotions and thoughts and to really spin it to a positive experience. But someone with advanced dementia, they won't be able to do that. So if you notice that your loved one is struggling and choosing to be isolated, then maybe bring in someone familiar, their buddy, to get them to go out, get them to talk. People can just go to free places, the library, the church, senior centers, just go and meet people frequently. That is part of the training. And healthy brains, and even those who have early dementia, they can be trained to overcome social stressors and anxiety of socialization. But oftentimes, they'll need someone to help them. And I know in this internet and social media landscape, so many people are reluctant, even fearful, I would say, to talk to strangers. And it's become so prevalent that some of us, we accept this as being the new normal. Well, this is not normal, folks. Even if it is prevalent, it is unhealthy for the individual and for our entire society. It's kind of like saying urinary tract infections are common, so therefore they're normal, especially in women. But it is not normal to have an infection in the urinary tract, even if you're female. Let's not normalize abnormal behavior like social isolation. So let's exercise and connect redirect ourselves, train our brains to be healthy by engaging with different people in different communities. And we do this starting when we're young. It doesn't count when we're responding to texts and chats and emails and commenting on social media when nobody can respond. That does not replace face-to-face social interactions. And if you're fearful to get some kind of communicable respiratory disease, well, stay outdoors when you interact with people so that you have this constant free-flowing air, or open your windows and doors and turn on a HEPA filter if you're going to be indoors. And you can always wear your N95.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
Now, within the entorhinal cortex, there are special neurons called grid cells that help encode distance and direction, while the hippocampal place cells fire when you are in a specific location. The parietal lobes, they also contribute by integrating spatial attention and body orientation, which helps you understand where you are in space relative to other objects around you. And this system is one of the earliest systems affected in Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. And notice, we've been moving around the brain from front to the sides to the insides of your brain. And your brain is really like a muscle. You need to work it out. Otherwise, it'll atrophy just like your muscle. And when it atrophies, it runs out of power, and that becomes a disease like Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's, it's thought to begin with the abnormal formations of proteins like tau proteins that accumulate in the entorhinal cortex. And then it spreads to the hippocampus. And so because these regions, they're essential to spatial memory and navigation, early damage shows up clinically as getting lost in familiar places, having difficulty following routines that were once automatic, or confusion about where one is, even when memory or facts or words still seem relatively intact. Now, you may recognize family members and they're still holding a conversation, yet they struggle to find their car in the parking lot or navigate to their own neighborhood. That is why problems with location and memory and navigation are considered one of the earliest cognitive red flags for dementia. They really reflect structural and functional injury to the hippocampus entorhinal network, often before widespread cortical involvement occurs. Now, clinically, subtle spatial disorientation, they can precede more obvious memory loss, language problems, or executive function by years, making it an important warning sign. Now, my life was forever changed when I realized that my mom was demented. But looking back, I honestly saw signs way before then. She would get lost getting to my house, a drive in which she did 4 years. However, it just takes one incident. Just one day, she was so lost that she was super late. And she just blamed it on road closures. So I just thought nothing of it, because that's a totally legitimate reason to be late, right? Then she also started getting lost driving home. And in those days, she didn't have a smartphone. She had a map, a Thomas guide. There was no GPS. But honestly, I just thought it was typical for my mom, because she was just never good with directions. Know anyone like that? My mom would be the one struggling to find her car in the parking lot in Disneyland. So when she got lost driving to my house, I basically kind of didn't think much of it, even though now I realize that was pretty odd, because she used to be able to drive to my house without a problem. My mom also started misplacing things. When she lost her keys, they were literally at the foot of her chair, but I had to go home to find it. Statistically, stories like mine are painfully common. Dementia affects more than 55 million people worldwide, and that number is expected to triple by 2050. And in the US, nearly 1 in 3 adults over 85 has dementia. But what's rarely discussed is that the disease process often begins in midlife, sometimes 40s or 50s, long before anybody recognizes a diagnosis. You don't want to wait for your autopsy to show that you have a problem, right? Because autopsies can show changes in the brain, which can occur 20 years before symptoms meet diagnostic criteria for Alzheimer's. That's called early dementia, and it's usually late-stage biology. Now, number 3 is finding the right words, finding words words can be difficult, people often start knowing what they want to say. The words just feel out of reach. They substitute simpler words to compensate. They may pause in mid-sentence. They joke about losing their vocabulary. And sure, once in a while, we all forget a term or so, but we don't forget the ones we commonly use. However, when we practice talking to people over and over and socializing and practice conversation, it gets easier to remember what normal, healthy brains do. A brain with dementia can improve when they keep practicing skill sets like conversations. However, a person who has advanced dementia, they are likely to lose more of their vocabulary. They're difficult to notice in the beginning. Part of it is because the language retrieval depends on distributed cortical networks. Early damage shows signal transmission, especially under pressure and fatigue. Comprehension remains intact, yet people compensate well, which delays cognition. And family members, I often say, they're still just as sharp, even as language efficiency slightly declines. My mom misplaced words during conversation, and she would actually blame it on being tired. And I could tell things were becoming overwhelming, but I kind of ignored it. Number 4 is a reduced ability to do once normal tasks. Normal routines that felt easy before, like planning a trip, managing multiple appointments, following recipes, they start feeling overwhelming. Now, I found myself helping my mom with household tasks that she couldn't do prior. And I can tell she would always get anxious. And so she ignored a leaking water heater and toilet, but eventually we convinced her to stop watering her garden when it rains. Some people call it frugalness or being cheap. Others just realize we don't want to hire help. And in reality, the brain's executive networks are struggling to even realize that these are important to address. In essence, people with dementia have reduced cognitive load tolerance. Now, on the outside, it may seem like you just don't know what they're thinking, yet they're ignoring the obvious problems. The reality is, people with dementia, they don't recognize or know how to solve simple routine tasks. That comes to number 9, which is subtle changes in mood or emotional regulation. Do you know anybody who gets irritated easily or frustrated over the smallest thing, right? Or anxious over seemingly normal situations? And sometimes it seems that they really simply don't care. But in a split second, everything seems to be back to normal. These emotional outbursts or apathy can often precede memory loss by years, and it is not uncommon to attribute these changes to personality, to menopause, to retirement, or lifestyle stress. But the problem is that anything can trigger these emotions as they lose emotional control. Now, my mom, she socially isolated herself after my dad passed away, and simply the idea of a stranger coming to fix anything in her house would give her so much stress that she would end up raising her voice at me. I just thought she was frustrated at the cost or inconvenience. But regulating emotions is tightly linked to the frontal limbic circuitry, which is highly vulnerable to inflammation and vascular injury. Doesn't this sound like mood disorder? Yep. Mental health issues like anxiety and depression increase not only the risk of dementia, but can often be a manifestation of dementia itself. Now, sign number 6 is impaired sense of spatial processing. So spatial processing is the brain's ability to perceive, understand, and mentally manipulate the relationships between object spaces and your own body in the environment. It allows you to know where things are, how far away they are, and how they relate to each other, and how you are oriented within a space. So for example, if I say, pick up a supplement and put it in front of the box, that is knowing where in front is in relation to the box, right? That's actually multiple steps. Pick something up and put it in front of the box. So I can say, pick up a supplement, put it in between the first supplement and the box, and then place it behind it. So if I were to follow those instructions, I would pick up a supplement, put it in between the first supplement and the box, and then take it and place it behind it. Now, obviously, I could do it because I gave myself instructions. But a person with dementia would not be able to follow these instructions depending on how serious their dementia is. Now, when you lose this ability, you lose the ability to safely drive. So people with difficulty in spatial processing, they won't be able to safely judge the distance of their car to the car in front or behind them. And in the beginning, they may not be the ones getting into accidents, but they may be the ones to cause accidents because they're not able to anticipate the distance of of other cars that are trying to maneuver around their car. They will also have difficulty following multiple step instructions. I just did an example, or you can say take a paper in your right hand, fold it in half, and then place it on the floor. These are complex tasks requiring multiple steps for the brain to process and to know space references and to integrate it into what they need to do. I often found my mom unable to pay attention. She would literally fall asleep in the middle of a conversation with literally 1 minute I'm talking to her and the next she's snoring. So in the beginning, I just thought I was just being very boring. But eventually I realized she couldn't stay awake for anybody or anything. And that's the seventh sign, declining sleep quality. Lost deep REM sleep. So you don't wake up refreshed. You wake up frequently at night, or you experience fragmented sleep, possibly for years before the diagnosis of dementia. This means that your sleep is not restorative. There's no downtime for the brain. There's no cleanup for the brain. Basically, the active housekeeping state. And during deep sleep, cleanup happens. Your cerebral spinal fluid flushes metabolic waste, including amyloid beta plaques. Now, chronic sleep disruption just simply accelerates toxic protein accumulation and synaptic injury. And unfortunately, this becomes a vicious cycle upon itself. So poor sleep is not just a symptom. It is a driver of neurodegenerative diseases. Fix your sleep. Get in a routine. Get to bed before 11. Try not to wake up in the middle of the night to eat or to pee. If you're used to not falling asleep immediately in bed, then really try to cool down your room. Make your bedroom only for sleeping. Routine is super important. Try not to eat 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. And if you find yourself getting up multiple times at night, and it could be because you have a problem with metabolism, could be excessive glucose. So don't just think it's because you're drinking too much. You may be drinking too much for a reason. And that's why it's important to check it out. Go see a physician. And if you're struggling with sleep, see a sleep doctor. They are specialists in helping people figure out why they can't sleep. And it could be as simple as having a machine to help you breathe, because lots of people have obstructive sleep apnea. So they don't have restful sleep and they become excessively tired during the day. But you can't have that diagnosis at home by yourself. You got to see a sleep specialist or a pulmonologist to make that diagnosis. So the eighth sign is increased sensitivity to sensory input from noise or light. She would often complain that the music I was playing in the car just simply irritated her. It was too loud. It was irritating. Busy environments would feel overwhelming. They would trigger anxiety. Background noise becomes intolerable to them, and bright lights can cause headache and fatigue. So this really reflects impaired sensory filtering by the brain's inhibitory networks. Now, a healthy brain can be trained to suppress irrelevant input automatically. And when that filtering weakens, the world just feels overwhelming, louder, brighter, just more exhausting to engage. So she would spend more time home alone, and she avoided stimulation, which then further reduces cognitive resilience. Practicing going out in small aliquots can sometimes help. Number 9 is excessive rumination over a thought. It's often repetitive, negative. It's really the same thought over and over. And it's just this loop without any resolution. It's commonly actually seen in depression, anxiety, and is associated with increased stress, poor sleep, and difficulty concentrating and dementia. So sometimes these thoughts, they can be so inhibiting and so negative against a particular person. So in my mom's case, she would pick on an extended family member, and that family member couldn't do anything right. It's like nothing she could do could ever please my mom, even though this person was the sweetest person and loved and cared for her. But in my mom's mind, there was always an ulterior motive for everything that she did. So in the beginning, I found myself defending her. And no matter what I would say, though, my mom just believed what she believed. And then we would get into arguments, and then my mom would just be even more upset and irritated. This was beyond stubbornness. One day I realized that this was a sign of moderate to advanced dementia. And the best way to handle this situation was really just simply change the subject. You can't argue with illogical logic. So there's no point in trying, because everybody just gets really mad and frustrated. The conversation just was getting emotional for both parties. So I just realized distraction works best. It's best to distract people, do something else, change the conversation, do something the enjoyable and pleasant. Take the mind off of those ruminating thoughts. Number 10 is really trouble organizing. The house gets messier. Refrigerators overstuffed with rotten food. Dust collects, laundry piles up, and appointments are simply missed. And in the beginning, it may seem like that person has been living in a mess their entire lives. But the difference is that this mess is amplified so much that it becomes unlivable. And sometimes the house becomes dangerous. Helping the person organize, simply doing activities of daily living is super important for the person who is demented to practice that. Folding clothes, washing laundry, washing dishes, watering the garden. If they can all be safely done with supervision, then they should be done. Because this then helps and reminds people that these are the things that the brain should be doing, like the body should be doing. Oftentimes, loved ones get in the habit of doing these things for them because they feel bad for them. But actually, doing those things for them takes away exercise for the brain, for structure, routine, and practice to do these activities of daily living. So it's important that that's still involved, but some things may need to be supervised, like going out in the backyard or garden or front yard. They may be supervised, or they may wander away or leave the water on or do something else that could be harmful. Cooking is also another activity that they should practice, but at the same time, they need to be supervised because it could be very dangerous, right? Using utensils or cutting equipment or fire and gas. My mom, she would burn food quite often. And I realized she would, like once, I think she burnt her chicken, the same pot of chicken that she was trying to cook several times. And so she messed up like 3 pots trying to cook chicken. And it was the same chicken. This kind of irrational, illogical logic, they don't realize is irrational or illogical. And that's why they need supervision. And the more supervision they get, the more they are reminded to practice and see things in the correct point of view, so that the next time they do it, they'll do it a little bit better. And the food that they eat and they choose to eat is super important and to preserve their brain health. I had mentioned some of them in the beginning. If you want to learn more, watch the next video.